Yeah, if I've seen it asked once, I've seen it asked 1,000 times. The question is, what are my comic books worth? And in this video today, we're going to go over how you can answer that question for yourself with a little bit of research. What's up, everybody? I'm Guy Wozniak, and you're watching the Comic Book Guy channel. And today we're going to go over that question. How do you find out the value of your comic books? Well, there's probably several reasons why you might need to know the value of them. Maybe you were a collector back in the day and you haven't touched them in 20 or 30 years, and you went through your attic or your basement or whatever, and there's a collection of comics. You're curious, have they appreciated in value since you were a 12-year-old kid? Maybe you've inherited comic books from your dad or, your uncle, cousin, whoever, and you're just curious, what are these things actually worth? Well, the short answer is they're probably worth almost nothing, because like 99% of comic books have virtually no value, $1 or less in most cases. And this all boils down to the importance or the significance of the comic book itself, whether or not it's a key issue or just some random mundane issue, and of course, what the condition of the comic book is, because condition is everything when it comes to collectibles, whether it's comic books, trading cards, or really anything else. It's all about condition. So we're going to go over step by step all the things that you need to know in order to accurately, or at least, if not accurately, at least estimate what the value of a comic book is. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. So let's dive into it. So step number one, when you're trying to evaluate the value of a comic book, is you need to know where to look. And this might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, because people are going to be prone to want to dive into the price guide and just say like, oh, well, the price guide says this comic book is worth, this much. And that's never, usually anyways, that's never the case. Comic books and price guides suggest the value of a comic book, or really anything, depending on what we're talking about. But in this case, comic books, they suggest a value based on a certain condition. And if you don't know how to evaluate that condition, then you're going to be quoting the wrong price. But I'm going to start with the price guide list just to get that out of the way. Now, first and foremost, I think what most people use, because it's free, it's easy, and it's quick, is eBay. But this is the important part. Don't just look up the comic book on eBay and look at all the listings and say like, oh, there's one that's going for $100. That's what the comic is worth. People can list things on eBay for any ridiculous price that they want with no rhyme or reason to it. So just because it's what someone's asking for it certainly doesn't mean that's what it's worth. What you have to do is go into the filters section after you've done your search and select sold or completed listings. Those show you the price that people actually paid for the comic book that you're searching for. And even in that case, there might be outliers, like, this comic book sold 10 times in the last 3 months, and one time somebody paid $100 for the comic book, but the other 9 times it averaged between 30 and 40. Well, it's not worth 100 if one crazy person wildly overpaid. So keep that in mind. But this is your free and easy option. Just check eBay's sold or completed auctions, and that's the price. The thing that I like to personally use is a website called gpanalysis.com. There's another similar website, which I have used, called gocollect.com. These are aggregation websites. They take sales from eBay and potentially other sources as well, and they aggregate it down for you. But they focus specifically on graded comic books. There's a company out there, if you're not aware, called CGC, and a couple of others as well. They'll take your comic book, they will assess its condition, they will give it a grade from 0 to 10, they will encapsulate it into a container that is sealed so that it can't be opened, and there's a tag at the top that says this is grade 9.0 or 9.4 or whatever. gpanalysis.com only shows you the value based on sales data of graded comic books, but a 9.4 graded comic book condition-wise is the same as a near mint condition comic book, and we'll get into talking about condition here later. But an 8.0 graded comic book is the same thing as a very fine condition comic book. Now, generally, comic books that are graded and encapsulated command a little bit of a premium over their ungraded counterparts, so keep that in mind. But if you go on gpanalysis.com and you search for a comic book, let's just say, Amazing Spider-Man number 300, and you're looking for like a 9.2 grade or a near mint minus grade comic book, Look that up and it'll say that the average price is around $530 or thereabouts for that comic book. So now you know what it's worth, at least graded. Again, subtract a little bit from the grade if it's a raw, ungraded comic book. Another option, which I've personally never used, but I've heard really good things about, is an app. It's a phone app, two parts, kind of. There's an app called CLZ Comics, and this app lets you input your entire comic book collection into a database for organizational purposes so that you can quickly look and reference what comics do I have in my database. There's an add-on component to that called Cover Price. These do have a monthly cost associated with them. They're not free. As is the previous example, GP Analysis, it's not free. But a lot of people use that Cover Price add-on to the CLZ Collectors app, and I've heard nothing but good things about it. But I don't have any experience with it myself, so I can't really go too in-depth on it. But that's something you could check out. Now, another option is to check dealers' websites. I really like mycomicshop.com. My Comic Shop is a fantastic dealer. No sponsorship. I'm not being paid to say this or anything. Just somebody I like buying comics from. You see what they're selling for. That's kind of a good indication. Their asking prices tend to not be outlandishly above fair market value because they're in the business to actually sell the comic books. So if, all else fails, see if they have the comic for sale and see how much they're asking for it. That is at least kind of a good rough starting point. And then finally, we have like a printed price guide, and I lugged this big bad mamma jamma out. Look at how thick this sucker is. This is the current edition of the Overstreet comic book price guide. And we're going to talk about whether or not printed price guides are still relevant in 2026. I think, yes, kind of they are, for several reasons, and we'll get into that. But that is another option. Now, the thing to remember, or to at least know, and keep in mind about things like this Overstreet comic book price guide, which you can go to Barnes & Noble and pick up a soft cover version. I just saw, I bought the hardcover because I kind of collect these, not every single year, but periodically I'll pick one up every few years. But the thing to keep in mind is that obviously this pricing data gets more and more dated as time passes because they just come out once a year. This is the 2026 edition. It just came out in March, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it's now December or January or February of 2027. This is old data. You know what I mean? Like, things probably have changed. There's a lot of things that can happen that will influence the price of a comic book over the course of months and, the year until the next version of this comes out. But this is still a valuable tool. And let's talk about why I think Overstreet's comic book price guide is still relevant. Again, not sponsored, just my opinion. So yeah, this here is the 2026 current, as of, I think about March it came out, 55th edition of the Overstreet's comic book price guide. I love Overstreet comic book price guides. I own several of them over the years. One of the things that I love about it, well, first, actually, let's talk about the price real quick. This hardcover is $45, if I'm not mistaken. Softcover's $35. This is much thicker than previous years' versions. And it's funny because it has less pages. Me and my buddy Matt, who's my co-host on the channel that isn't here with me today, but is normally here with me, checked, and this has like 900 and some odd pages. And the previous one had, about 1,100 pages. And this one is significantly thicker. The quality of the paper that they're using is not as good. This is like newsprint paper now, as opposed to that nice, fine, not quite Bible paper, but nice, thin, fine paper. Whatever. It's thicker. It takes up more room on the shelves. But yeah, price-wise, $45 for the hardcover, $35 for the softcover. As the year progresses, if they're still in stock somewhere, they usually go on sale, so you can get them cheaper. The things that I do like about this, well, first, the thing that I don't like, and I mentioned it previously, is that the prices aren't up to date. As more and more time passes, these become less and less up to date. That's not necessarily a bad thing. What is nice about it, though, is that, number one, it has grading definitions on, I think I wrote down here on my notes, page 150. So if you don't know how to grade the condition or estimate the condition of your comic books, pick up one of these just for that. It has a whole several page long chapter explaining, like, a 10.0 is a gem mint, and there's a paragraph explaining why a 10 is a 10. 9.9 is mint. 9.8 is near mint mint. Again, a whole paragraph after all of these explaining what sort of imperfections you might find on comic books of this example. It will help you learn to estimate the condition, because estimating the condition is the most important part of estimating the value of a comic book. So a nice grading section in this book. That alone is probably worth the $45 if you've never bought one of these before. On top of that, though, here's the thing that I really like about it. Let's say you know nothing about comic books, or maybe you just know nothing about, I don't know, Amazing Spider-Man. Maybe you've been a Batman or an X-Men fan your whole life, right? You can go to the Amazing Spider-Man section of this book and probably put on your reading glasses, because the font, the typography, whatever you want to call it, is absolutely tiny in this. I can barely read it myself, and obviously I wear glasses. I don't have the best vision, but yeah, throw on your readers or get a magnifying glass if you need it, and go to, again, let's just theoretically or hypothetically, let's say Amazing Spider-Man, and you can kind of go down the list here, and you can look, and you'll see like, okay, I'm just arbitrarily around issue 250. I started here. I can see like, okay, there's a book that's worth $20. There's a book that's worth $30. There's a book that's worth $40. There's a book that's worth $225. Okay, something is different about that book than all the rest of them. What's going on with that book? Oh, well, it's issue number 252. That is the first black Amazing Spider-Man black costume, alien costume in comics. So that's a key issue. That's worth more than all the issues around it. And then, subsequently we can keep going. And it's like, okay, here's a $20 comic book. Here's an $18 comic book. Here's a $30 comic book. And then suddenly here's a $600 comic book. Oh, well, that's Amazing Spider-Man number 300. Why is that an important issue? So we can use this not for accurate price information, but for telling us what comic books are the ones that are important, just by glancing through the list. It's like, okay, here's a book in the early 100s. It's like, oh, there's a $100, a $200, a $50, a $4,000 comic book. Okay, well, that one stands out. Why is that different? And it tells you right here in the text. Well, it's issue 129, first appearance of the Punisher, first appearance of the Jackal. So now we know issue 129 of Amazing Spider-Man, if we didn't already know that, is a key issue because it's the first appearance of those two characters, and it's substantially more valuable than all of the other issues around it. That is one of the reasons why I still love this Overstreet price guide. Not necessarily for the prices themselves, which can be fairly accurate, and I'll get to comparing the prices from this book versus online sources. Yeah, the prices are not always 100% accurate, but it does give you some tools to teach you about comic books. And I think that is absolutely more important than knowing the price, because there's lots of places that you can look up the prices. Yeah, my last thing that I will mention about Overstreet price guide, but besides those few things that I've already said, is that, well, two things. There's a cool little top comics section that I like. It just talks about Gold Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and modern. Geez, train of thought, sorry. And it's a list of comic books that says like, oh, these are some like big books in those different eras. That's cool. Again, just to educate yourself on like what are the big valuable books that you should maybe just off the top of your head be familiar with. Because if you ever stumble across them, you want to know like, oh, that's an important comic book. Either it's in my collection and I didn't realize I have it. Maybe I'm out shopping, whatever the case may be. It just, is again, it's an educational tool. And then, finally, like this is just a piece of comic book history. And it's going to be gone before too long. They're going to stop publishing this book. I don't have any inside information to suggest that that's going to happen this year, next year, whatever. But like eventually, this is going to be gone, because we can go back to the old days when we used to look up our comic books. Wizard magazine, they stopped publishing this, and it's it was sad when it happened. I love Wizard magazine, and yeah, that went away. And yeah, the Overstreet comic book price guide, if I'm, just making predictions, someday that's going to go away. So this is a piece of comic book history that I think us as fans and collectors of comic books should kind of cling to, kind of celebrate and enjoy. And yeah, just buy a copy if not every year, every couple of years. I don't think that there's any reason not to have a few of these sitting on your shelves. So now let's talk about comic condition versus comic price, because while I said that Amazing Spider-Man number 129 is worth $4,000, that's in near mint condition. Near mint condition versus very good condition is substantially different in terms of price. So if you're going through your dad's old comic books and it's like, oh, he's got Amazing Spider-Man number 129. Wow, this is $4,000. Woohoo. But like there's giant tears and stains, water damage. The cover is detached. There's chunks missing from the interior of the comic book. Like that is not a near mint comic book. That is not worth $4,000, no matter how much of an amazing comic book and how important of a comic book it is. At very good, it's worth hundreds of dollars at best. So you need to understand the difference between comic book grade and condition and how that affects price. And if you can't accurately estimate the condition of a comic book, then you're never going to be able to accurately estimate the value of a comic book. Now, this isn't a grading instructional video. That would probably take, I mean, I don't think I could accurately or sufficiently offer you a full grading tutorial. I'm sure there's videos out there that do that. And yeah, I'm not like that good at it. Well, first of all, grading a comic book, evaluating the condition of a comic book is somewhat subjective. Even if you send a comic book off to a professional grading company like CGC, you could send the same comic book back to them multiple times and get different grades every time because it is somewhat subjective. It has to do with who's looking at it on that particular day. So yeah, again, this isn't a grading tutorial video. I'm just not equipped to offer you that knowledge. But there are some things that you can look for that are easy to recognize, and it will at least kind of give you an idea of what the grade of a comic book might be. And first of all, let's talk about the grade scale. It goes from 0 all the way up to 10, and it goes generally in half-point increments, except at the very bottom and at the very top. But what you really want to concern yourself with are probably 4 grades, maybe 5. Going from the bottom to the top: good, very good, fine, very fine, and near mint. You want to concern yourself with those 5 grades and at least have an idea. Go online and look. What does a very good comic book look like? Cover, back cover, interior pages. What does a fine comic book look like? What does a very fine comic book look like? And what does a near mint comic book look like? If you can get to the point where you can identify those main 5 grades, all of the little like points in between, like I said, an 8.0 is very fine. So a 7.5 is like very fine minus, a 7 is a fine / very fine, so on and so forth. You don't have to get that granular to at least get a good idea of what a comic book might be worth. Now, once you get over near mint, like super high grade, really great condition comic books can escalate in price wildly. So yeah, at that point now you're like really worried about those nuances of 9.2, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, 9.9, even a 10. That can wildly and dramatically affect the grade. But that is because of rarity. Like, you could go and look at a certain comic book and say like, okay, this comic book exists like 100 examples in 9.8, but only like 3 examples in 9.9. It's not the condition that's really important. It's the rarity that really makes that price or value escalate. I wouldn't concern myself with that stuff personally. I don't, dabble in super, super high grade stuff anyway. But yeah, the things that you want to look for when you're evaluating comic book condition is spine, creases or ticks. There's different ways that you could describe it. But, when the spine is bent, there will be a little crease in the spine. And every single one of those little creases that goes up and down the spine will dramatically affect the condition or the grade. If there's one and it doesn't break the color, if it's a crease, but on a black cover, all the black is still there, all the printing is still there, that's a little bit different than if it's creased and the black has been rubbed away and you can see white paper through that crease. Color breaking versus non-color breaking spine ticks, probably the first and easiest thing to keep a lookout on. Next, I tend to check the corners. Are they square and sharp? Are they blunted? Are they bent? All top, right, left, bottom, right, and left corners. Really look at those closely. That's going to degrade the condition if those are blunted or bent or or tore or anything like that. If they're not perfectly nice and square, that's a negative to condition. So you got the spine ticks, you got the corners. Look for little tears, even a little like quarter to half-inch tear on the edge of the cover. That's going to negatively impact the grade or the condition of the comic book, and it's going to lower the value substantially. Creases, whether it's just a small little corner crease that got folded over on accident, or if it's a crease down the entire cover or through the entire book, the more severe the crease, the more severely it's going to affect the value. So, look out for creases. Do we say tears? Any sort of missing pieces? Definitely. The bigger the piece, the more it's going to affect it. A little teeny tiny corner chunk missing will affect it a lot less than a full quarter of the cover or back cover or something. There's also something called chipping on older comic books. It's kind of like a tear, but technically it's not. Little chunks kind of chipped off because the page has gotten fragile. Keep a lookout for that. Water damage is a big one. Mold, rusty staples. These are all things that happen to older comic books more often than newer comic books. But be on the lookout for that. As all of these defects start to build up and up and up, the condition and hence the value goes down and down and down. So again, what I suggest is going online and looking up comic books in good condition, very good condition, fine, very fine, and near mint. And try to look at 10 examples of each. And from there, you should be able to start have a foundation of understanding of like what makes a comic book near mint, what makes a comic book very fine, what are the defects or the damage aspects that bring it down from level to level. That's where I would start and at least get you into the realm of being able to kind of estimate condition so that you can then go on to start looking up and estimating value. That's step one in determining the overall value of the books that you might have in your collection. So let's compare a few examples. I've got 6 here on my page, 6 comics that span different eras of comic books. And let's talk about how dramatically the price differs from a printed guide like the Overstreet versus using eBay's sold listings versus using an aggregate website like GP Analysis. On GP Analysis, it will tell you 90-day averages, it'll tell you 12-month averages, it'll tell you the current price of the last example sold. So it's much more granular than just going to eBay and looking at sold listings where you might just look at the last 1 or 2 or 3 and you think you know the answer. Having the GP Analysis website kind of conglomerate all of that data into one useful piece of information that you can use, like 90-day average, is really valuable to me. And that's why I pay for their service. And again, it's not sponsored. They're not telling me to tell you. They don't know I'm making this video. It's just what I use to estimate value. Again, the downside of GPA is that it only gives you the prices of graded comic books. And you might have ungraded comic books, so you have to account for that. If it says the graded version of your comic book is worth $100, but yours isn't graded, yours is not worth $100. So, compensate for the fact that you might not have the graded version. But if you're talking about graded comic books, then yes, it's perfect. It's an amazing tool. In fact, if you're talking about buying comic books in general, you might buy graded comic books just to be assured or be more assured. CGC does mess up and they might say the grade is this, and in reality, it's probably overgraded. But generally, you should be more assured that the grade you're buying when it is, the condition that you're buying when it is in a graded slab is more accurate than, some random Yahoo is just selling you an ungraded comic book and claiming it's a certain grade. So, take that with a grain of salt. And frankly, I don't like graded comic books. I'm not trying to tell you that graded comic books are superior. If I buy a comic book graded, and I will sometimes, just because it's, convenient, the price is right, whatever, I'll bust the slab open and I'll have the ungraded comic book in my possession and I'll throw all that plastic away. But I'm not adverse to buying graded comic books. So anyway, let's talk about some comic books and compare the prices. Ghost Rider #1 from 1973. It's an amazing Bronze Age key issue. Let's say we're looking at a example that is either in very fine condition or CGC grade 8.0. That's the same thing, very fine and 8.0. Well, according to our Overstreet book here, That comic book in very fine condition is worth $441. So, not bad, right? Well, if we look at eBay sold data recently, kind of an average of the last few sales, $615. So actually Overstreet is undercutting you or underselling the value of that comic book by what are we talking about here? 160 some odd dollars, 441 versus 615. And then if we go to GP Analysis's website's 90-day average, they have it at 614. So the 90-day average and the eBay price are almost the same, and the Overstreet price is way under by 20 some odd percent. So, this is not accurate to the current market value. Let's go on to the next book, Amazing Spider-Man number 300. And we're going to be talking about a near mint minus or a 9.2 condition, graded condition comic book. According to Overstreet, we have $600 for that book, which we mentioned a little while ago. What about eBay sold listings? Well, $550 for the last few sales average. And then GP Analysis is 90-day average, $534. So Overstreet's actually about $50 to $70 overpriced on Amazing Spider-Man number 300. But even eBay is a little high if all you did was look at the most recent few sales. The 90-day average, according to GPA, $534. How about Fantastic Four number 48? That's a great Silver Age key comic book. 48, first Silver Surfer, is that right? First Galactus, I forget now. But regardless, let's say we have a 6.0 or fine, 6.0 and fine are the same thing, version of that comic book. Well, according to Overstreet, $1,242. eBay, last few sales average, $1,200. So Overstreet and eBay are really close within, less than 5%, 3% or so. That's pretty good. GP Analysis 90-day average, $1,092. So about $108 less than the last few sales on eBay. But the last few sales might have just been very recently and hyped up a little bit, maybe because of the latest Fantastic Four movie that came out. So the 90-day average hasn't caught up with it, perhaps. But for the most part, we're really close between Overstreet's price guide, eBay, and gpanalysis.com. So not bad there. How about Batman number 227? Classic cover. Love that one. Well, this is dramatic. An 8.0 or very fine condition. According to Overstreet, $744. I mean, it's a pricey book, right? Even in very fine condition. eBay, last few sales, $1,800 average, though. I mean, like if you had Batman 227 and you looked it up in Overstreet, you'd be like, oh, $750 book. Sold, right? Someone will give you that money immediately because the actual value is about $1,800 according to the last few eBay sales. GP Analysis 90-day average, $1,710. Pretty closely in line with the last few eBay sales. And that's always going to be the case because GP Analysis is aggregating eBay sales. It just gives you, I think, a more easy way to look at more data in like one data point. It takes all the averages of 90 days or 12 months and gives you one data point. Whereas if you go on eBay, you kind of got to scroll through the list and be like, oh, there's one for 15, there's one for 16, there's one for 21. And you kind of got to do that math in your head. GP Analysis does that all for you. That's what I love about it. But yeah, huge price difference. You could wind up selling your Batman number 227 for less than half of what it's actually worth if you went by this book. So yeah, not accurate. How about New Mutants number 98? We're talking about the first appearance of Deadpool. It's a great kind of modern key book. Near mint minus, graded 9.2 condition. What are we looking at? We're looking at $375 here in the Overstreet price guide, $350 on eBay, $326 on the GP Analysis 90-day average. So, ballpark, all within a decent margin of error from each other. I don't hate that the comic book Overstreet price guide has it a little bit higher, but it's not a ton. It's not wildly out of whack. And then a very modern book, Absolute Batman number 1, 9.2 near mint minus condition. Comic book price guide here, Overstreet has it at $100. If we look on eBay, recent sales are up to $200. So yeah, GP Analysis 90-day average has it at $167 though. So it looks like the most recent sales are escalating the price even higher than the 90-day average would lead you to believe. So yeah, I think that's an issue of it's a very new book, relatively speaking. And when they put that price in the comic book price guide, it's such a like quickly fluctuating comic book that it's just going to quickly fall out of line with what they've printed in the Overstreet. So yeah, there's 6 examples of a series of different comic books and how the printed price guide compares to using eBay sold listings or the website gpanalysis.com. Some surprises there for sure. Some stuff wildly out of line with the price guide versus the current online sales, and some stuff not too far off. It can be hit or miss, and I wouldn't rely on the Overstreet price guide as a a definitive source for pricing. But again, it has some value. Being able to look through it and quickly identify, like, is this book different than the rest? Is it a key book? Why? Why is this book or that book substantially more expensive than the books near it? Like, that's what this is really for. That's great. Throw in the grading explanation, tutorial or instructions. That's valuable. And yeah, I still say buy the Overstreet price guide if you don't have one in the last couple of years. For that information alone. So how do you get a valuation of your comic book collection, whether it's something that you collected when you were a kid, you haven't touched it in years, you inherited the books, whatever. I mean, you got to get informed on condition and evaluating the condition, assigning a grade to the comic books. You have to know how to do that. Otherwise, you're just kind of shooting in the dark. So yeah, once you've kind of got that under your belt, and it's not super hard, again, familiarize yourself with the different grades, good, very good, fine, very fine, near mint, and mint, and look at examples of each one so that you can identify what are the flaws or the damages that influence the condition nomenclature. And from there, then you can start looking up the current, most recent sales data information about the books that you have, and you'll be able to get a pretty good idea of what your comics are worth. It's a time-consuming process. It's maybe not fun if you're not into comic books. It might be easier to go to a trusted comic book dealer and ask them to just make you an offer, keeping in mind that they're going to offer you much less than fair market value because they have to sell the books themselves and turn a profit. But that might be worth the hassle of not having to do all of this work if you're in the position where you want to sell comic books. Now, if you're in the position where you want to buy comic books, maybe the answer is I only buy graded comic books, so I don't have to worry about condition and knowing how to, evaluate condition. It makes it easier looking up prices. GP Analysis is all graded comic books. So even if you're searching on eBay and you're like, well, I want to know what a raw, ungraded, fine condition, Incredible Hulk issue 247 is worth. Like, there might not be many ungraded, fine condition copies of that book on eBay that have ever sold. And then, of course, the people that are saying it's a fine condition comic in their listings could be wrong, right? So, like, they might be describing it as fine, but it could be significantly worse. Buying and selling ungraded comic books is rife with issues. So you might say, like, okay, I'm just going to stick to graded comics, and it's going to make my job easier, and I don't have to learn all of the intricacies of evaluating condition and grading and whatnot. That wouldn't be wrong. I wouldn't say you're crazy if you wanted to go that route. Myself personally, I prefer ungraded comics. I like them to be accessible. I like to be able to open them and read them and look at them and everything. So it's not the way that I go, but I will buy graded occasionally. I always, like I said, bust them out of their cases when I do buy graded comic books, just because, like, I prefer, again, to have access to them. That makes it more fun for me. So yeah, there's lots of things to think about in this process of, determining value and price and whatnot. But it's really not that complicated once you wrap your head around the basics of evaluating condition, assigning grade, and you understand what tools are out there for you to look up values based on the grade of the comics that you have. It really all falls in place, and And it's not that big of a deal if you want to dedicate a little bit of time and effort into it. So yeah, that's it. That's my closing thoughts on this discussion. Let me know down in the comments below if you liked this video, if you agree or disagree with any of it, and yeah, how you handle, pricing and grading of your comic books in your collection. I'd be interested in hearing about that. So, with all of that said, I'm going to wrap this one up for today and say thanks, as always. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Do me a favor, hit the like button, little thumbs up down there. Hit the subscribe button, that's more important. Hit the bell if you want to be informed of notifications whenever we put up new videos. You don't want to miss those. But yeah, I'll close this out like I always do, and I will say keep collecting comics, keep watching our videos, and until the next one, bye now.